course, had our annual monitoring report, which is before you today. And on reflection, I'd like to just get confirmation for the board that you're happy to continue that format. My view is that it is a useful format. It still addresses some of the issues that we raised in our original report, but also I think it provides a really useful narrative for the public, but also newer members of the board to see where we were and how much progress or lack of it we've made. So first of all, I'd like your approval that we continue to monitor in that way. And secondly, in terms of the individual recommendations, I'd like to move that we assign all of them a 4, which basically is progress is being made, but we want to continue monitoring. So can I just put that formally to the board from the chair? Is that agreed? Okay, smashing. So agenda item 7, advancing bus service provision. And we do have a number of very welcome guests, and I'm going to ask them now to introduce themselves before asking Dave Pearson from IIIG to give us a presentation on the bus service improvement plan, which really is the focus of today's discussion, but it doesn't prevent members from making reference to the monitoring report as well. So starting on my left.
Morning, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Andrew McGuinness, CPT, Regional Manager for the North of England. CPT is the trade body for bus and coach operators, and I'm also Chair of the Bus Operators Association West Yorkshire.
Okay, welcome, Andrew.
Morning, everyone. My name is Paul Matthews, Managing Director of First Bus in West Yorkshire.
Welcome.
Good morning, Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation at Leeds City Council.
Morning, Dave Pearson, Director of Transport and Property Services at West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Morning, Councillor Kim Groves, Councillor for Middleton Park Ward and Lead Member for Public Transport at West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Good morning, Helen Hayden, Councillor for Temple Newton Ward and Exec Member for Infrastructure and Climate.
Good morning, Alex Hornby, Chief Executive of Transdev.
Good morning, Dwayne Wells, Head of Commercial for Arriva Buses.
Okay, thank you very much and welcome everyone. I hope you find it a constructive and helpful session today. I think we've now got a presentation from Dave Pearson, as I said previously, from IIIG, that will focus particularly on bus service improvement plan. I will then ask any other people at the bottom table, I nearly said top table, but I'm not going to kind of be too prejudicing this, to make any contributions that they wish to do. And then I'll throw it open to questions and comments from members of the board, but not just on the presentation, also on the monitoring report as well. So Dave, the floor is yours.
Right, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'll try and keep this presentation relatively brief because I think the value of these meetings is in the questions and the issues which we talk about. But I think it has been quite a busy year since this committee last looked at this particular issue, and I think it's quite useful to bring you all up to speed with where we are and the things that have happened in the year and where we take things next. So that's the purpose of the presentation initially. Becky, if you can take us to the next one, thank you. Back in the start of the year, the government published its national bus strategy. It's a picture of the front cover there, and set out the government's vision for bus services, and set out a number of sort of key issues that it sought to address in the process of addressing and improving the role of buses in the public transport and in the people's mobility generally, and it set out some very clear pictures in terms of where I wanted to take things: fares to be cheaper and easier to use, better customer service information and customer service generally, bus networks to be better integrated with other modes, including bus rail integration and interchange, and the highway infrastructure to enable faster, frequent, more reliable bus services. So what that document set those aspirations out and set up a process to seek to deliver that through something called a bus service improvement plan, which all local transport authorities were required to submit to government by the end of October. And as local transport authority for this region, that task fell to the combined authority. And the bus service improvement plan was basically set out the region's ambition and vision for buses, how we will work collaboratively with highway authorities such as the council, bus operators, and local business to deliver that, and set out the targets and how it's intended to grow bus patronage. The idea of a bus service improvement plan is to be a live document and to be reviewed and updated annually as part of a process. And so the initial announcements back in January identified £3 billion available from government to be able to fund the bus service improvement plan. I think subsequently that figure seems to be a little bit less clear now in terms of what funding is available for the sort of transformative elements of the bus service improvement plan, because there's a live issue with funding the current provision of services through the pandemic, and I'll touch on that in the presentation towards the end. So if we move to the next slide, thanks, Becky. As the chair has reminded us, Tracy Brabin was elected as Mayor of West Yorkshire back in May, and Tracy made a number of public pledges in terms of the things she wanted to address if she was elected, and she successfully was. And on that slide, the pledge regarding buses is to bring buses back under public control, introduce simpler fares, contactless ticketing, and greener buses. So that's a pledge that the Mayor has made, and that's the sort of sets the tone effectively for the bus service improvement plan and what follows it. As part of the government process to be able to fund changes in bus provision, the government set out clearly that it expected all local transport authorities to be using the Bus Services Act provisions as a means of delivering this. And I think those members who have been on this scrutiny board in previous years will know that, and we've had discussions about the Bus Services Act. It sets out a variety of different partnership models, and it also sets out the provision of bus service franchising. And so what government said was that all local transport authorities needs to be in the process of using the Bus Services Act. Only Greater Manchester were sufficiently far enough along the process of franchising to be able to count that. So essentially for West Yorkshire, that meant that adopting the enhanced partnership provisions, which are set out in the Act, and I'm happy to discuss what that means in the ensuing question and answer session. But what the Combined Authority also did is to publish a notice of intent to prepare an assessment of the need for a franchising scheme, which is the very, very first stage under which the process to establish franchising. So essentially, back in June, shortly after the mayoral election, the Combined Authority sort of made a fairly clear sort of roadmap towards the provision of both an enhanced partnership and franchising. If we can move to the next slide, that sort of sets out that process. And sorry, this is quite a busy slide, but it's one of those, how do you get a very complicated thing on one slide type of situation. But if we follow that from left to right, it gives you a bit of an idea of the sort of process that
But we do have it in the agenda pack as well.
So you've seen that. So I'll pick out a few key dates. October 21, the Bus Service Improvement Plan was submitted. The process of establishing the enhanced partnership will start, and the Combined Authority will approve that at its meeting in a couple of weeks' time in early December. The government require us to be in an enhanced partnership by the end of March. So that's the April 2022 date. Skipping forward then, in parallel to that, to work around the assessment for franchising sort of brings it to a sort of a key decision point of adopting all the processes in August to December 2023, was when we consult, and the mayoral decision would have to happen in January 24. And that is the shortest road map towards making those decisions that's allowable by the government guidance. So if we move to the next slide. So I just wanted to touch on the content of the bus service improvement plan. We've given you some content in the pack, so I won't labor this particular element of it, but I think that, we've set out a vision to have a more sort of fully inclusive and more cohesive bus and public transport network. And I think one of the key themes of the West Yorkshire Bus Service Improvement Plan, and bus operator colleagues will have seen others as well, is that we are looking at how do we make the bus network as inclusive as possible, and to enable people to make journeys they can't make at the moment. Supporting that with clear and simple fares, to improve customer service and information. A key plank of the bus service improvement plan is to actually make people have confidence in the bus by making bus journeys quicker and more reliable, and that does involve bus priority, and it does involve addressing the highway issues that sit around, and I'm sure Gary can touch on that as we have the discussion as well. And alongside that, we set out clear plan to make the bus fleet zero carbon, in line with the city and the region's targets in terms of zero carbon. So if we move again, I'll skip through this fairly quickly. The vision for the bus service improvement plan, I'll sort of emphasize that inclusivity element of it. It's very, very key in terms of what the plan is seeking to do, and to in doing so improve economic productivity, and address both the air quality and the carbon reduction elements, and to give people an alternative to the private car. And so it's important to the bus service improvement plan does establish bus as a key mode of travel for people in West Yorkshire, and to do that, we've got to have a financially sustainable bus service as well. So if we move to some of the content in terms of what it is we want to do, and again, I won't read these two slides out in full, but Becky, if you want to move to the next one. I think ticketing and the way people pay for travel is quite important, and moving to a different system that's more flexible to people's needs and more affordable is a key point, both of the region's bus service improvement plan, but also the government's requirements of us as well. I think some of that involves looking at what we call the core network, the frequent bus services, and having more routes operating on that basis, but also looking at when services operate at the beginning and end of day. I think one of the learnings that we've had from these meetings and others is that by having shrunk the service at the beginning and end of the day, we've made the whole day service less attractive to some people, and I think that that's one thing we're seeking to reverse. We're looking at how we can be innovative, particularly around using demand responsive transport to address particular mobility and connectivity issues that are not easily solved by having a large bus operating on regular frequency, and we set our target to be 100% zero emission by 2036. If we move to the next one. To do some of that, we do need to look at the customer facing elements of that, passenger information, and improving the customer experience generally, and the the sort of looking at safety in particular, and people's perception of safety is a key element of this. And we do need to monitor passenger satisfaction and to target specific customer groups and making people feel more comfortable. What I would say at this particular point in the presentation is we've developed this plan with a lot of input, both from the bus operators. Many people sat around this table have had a lot of input into this, as well as Gary and colleagues in the highways and transportation teams in the various councils as well. So this has been a collective effort to get to a bus service improvement plan. One of the requirements for funding is to do that together, and I'd like to think we have done. So if Becky, we sort of move to the next one. This gives you a flavour of the sort of timing of things, and in particular on the left-hand side, the sort of things we can do quickly, because some of the longer term things, particularly around the highway and infrastructure type of work, will take some time to work through, as will the sort of vehicle replacement element of it. But there are some things we can do relatively quickly, and some things we're actually already doing in terms of, you'll have seen in Leeds, the colour-coded bus stops that we've been introducing into the city this year. So if we move to the next slide, I think that the thing we've got to put as context is that the pandemic has had significant effect on the economics of bus services, as well as the economics of lots of other aspects of society and business as well. And so the bus service shrunk a little last year to a key worker service, and we're back to essentially the 2019 service levels now. Since March 2020, the bus service has been financially supported both by government grants and by the concessionary fare scheme that the combined authority had, making payments as if the reduced patronage hadn't happened. So we're paying for the sort of numbers of free bus pass users that we saw in 2019 to basically maintain cash flow through the bus system, whilst the patronage and the fares from the patronage were reduced. And that's not over yet. The bus patronage is around 70 to 75% of what we'd expect in 2019 in the city at the moment. And so there is a funding gap. And I think that has to be recognised, that there's a process to close that gap. But I think there's also reality that we're unlikely to see a return to 2019 patronage levels in 2022, and that's partly because people's travel habits have changed, and we will settle to a new base, and then the bus service improvement plan will seek to encourage more people to travel from that new base. I think the other thing, and colleagues and bus operators around the table can expand on this as well. I think we also have to be upfront the fact that bus operators, as many transport operators, are dealing with a shortage of drivers at the moment, and that is impacting on, to a certain extent, on services, and the bus operators can share their work to try and address that. But I think it is it's a live issue, and I think it's one that we've got to be upfront about. I think the final thing about the finances is that that leaves us a level of uncertainty. The government grant position is guaranteed until March. There is some discussion, some indication that there may be some further government funding into the next financial year. There's also a suggestion that might eat into further the £3 billion that's available for transformation. So it's a bit of a challenging financial position generally. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact that the pandemic and the changes to travel habits and the reduced demand that the pandemic's caused is a factor, and we can't ignore that. But neither can we use that as a reason not to have ambitious plans to build a better bus service out of that. And I think one of the things we do recognise, and colleagues in the bus industry do as well, is that people's habits have changed. The nature of the bus service will need to change with it. The nature in which people pay and how much to pay for their bus travel will need to change with it. And I think that's one of the things we set out to into a different world really with this. So I think that the final slide on this is next steps. The bus service improvement plan, whilst it's an annual document which we will update and review, it's also a bidding document, and we submitted at the end of October, and we wait to find out what the outcome of that is. And as I've just indicated, the element of what's deemed recovery funding and how that actually works into next financial year. We're in the process of establishing an enhanced partnership by the end of March, and that'll be the sort of laying the foundations for an enhanced partnership that actually builds from a base that we're in March, and the enhanced partnership will sort of expand as we bring forward the various different elements of the bus service improvement plan, as we bring forward investment in infrastructure to help buses move along roads faster. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in this city we've spent a lot of time and money, and particularly Gary and his team, delivering a lot of improvements for bus services already. We've seen the works in the Head Row, Park Row, and in Infirmary Street. The work's ongoing in Corn Exchange in that area now. Bus priority corridors in a number of parts of the city, the colour-coded route map and bus stops, and the additional real-time information screens, which I'm sure many of you have seen. And we're in the process of refurbishing the bus station. So quite a lot of investment in bus already happening this year, and schemes which are coming through and being launched over this year and into next. And one of the things we will do, in whatever form the funding takes, we will start addressing those quick wins that you saw on the slide earlier. So that's where we are, and I'll stop there. And I'm sure there's many questions that come out of that.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Before I ask Gary to come in from an LCC perspective and then to open it out to other guests, you did mention that you would elucidate on what constitutes an enhanced partnership and franchising. I think that would be useful from board members' point of view, because I don't think anywhere in our papers is that brought out. We have discussed it before, but I think for the benefit of reminding members, and especially those members who are new to the board, I think it would be useful if you could just give us a very quick synopsis of what those two initiatives constitute.
Okay, let's start with franchising. Franchising essentially is where the Transport Authority would, following a procurement process, award contracts to bus operators to provide a service that's specified by the Transport Authority, and the Transport Authority would fund that service. So to a certain extent, it moves the sort of financial responsibilities for the bus service entirely with the Transport Authority, who would then decide what level of bus service it wants, and what fares it wants to charge, and the sort of service provision that it wants to deliver, and then would commission that from bus companies through a procurement and a contracting environment. That contracting environment could involve shared risk and reward with operators, and we do work on a shared risk and reward basis for the park ride in Leeds, for example. So there are different options available in the franchising regime, but essentially it's the Transport Authority setting the service it wants and procuring that from operators who would deliver it to a specification. An enhanced partnership, and it's worth that complicated slide I showed earlier sort of illustrates there's quite a lot of government guidance and prescription around this. So we don't have a lot of sort of room for maneuver to design these things ourselves. But an enhanced partnership essentially retains that difference between the public body, the Transport Authority, to do the things Transport Authority does, and the commercial bus market to do the things commercial bus market does. What it does do is brings those things together so that they're managed and overseen in the same place. But the financial risk and reward largely sits with the commercial sector, with the Transport Authority deciding how much of the network it actually wants to commission through the tender services provisions, which we do at the moment. And as a Transport Authority, we fund around about 15% of bus mileage at the moment. So that sort of retains that status quo, if you want to call it that. But what it does do is actually create a governance model whereby the key decisions around the aspects of things are taken collectively. Excuse me, sorry. It also creates a contractualizing element called the enhanced partnership scheme, and so that commits both the bus operators to certain things like running Euro 6 or zero emission buses on routes. It can commit bus operators to doing certain aspects of service delivery and providing services in a certain way. It commits the Transport Authority potentially to do the various interventions it does in a prescribed way, and it commits the highway authorities to provide and deliver and manage the infrastructure. So it forces a sort of level of joint endeavour and joint commitment on all parties, and so what we have to have in place for March is essentially an enhanced partnership plan, how we would use these provisions to deliver across the piece, and we would have to have the starting of an enhanced partnership scheme, which is how you contractualize different pieces of infrastructure. So it's quite a sort of legal heavy process, or both processes are quite legal heavy, and a number of aspects in both franchising and in enhanced partnership have to satisfy something called a competition test, which is prescribed by government. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the difference between the two and how the process would work.
Thanks, Dave. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. If I just make a couple of comments then in relation to that. As Dave said, we are engaged with WICA over discussions over BSIP. BSIP is largely revenue funding, so it doesn't really give us much scope for new capital schemes, but obviously we're engaged in the process, and particularly around enhanced partnerships, and particularly trying to identify a route in Leeds that could go forward on that basis. And it's obviously you start to look at schemes that have been developed and seen improvements through the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme. So those are active discussions that we're partaking in and trying to understand what the implications might be. Happy to be involved, want to be involved, but need to understand what risk and issues might arise if we're not able to secure improvements sufficiently that allow the buses to run on time every minute of the day, and just want to understand what the risk might be with that under that sort of partnership. So those are ongoing discussions. I don't think there's anything untoward in there, but they do need to be worked through. Other points I'd make out from the presentation and the report today, just to reiterate what's on page 24 and 25, the good progress on the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme. There's an update there on that very significant programme that Dave alluded to as well. That programme has gone well. It's been hugely challenging, but it is seeing a lot of work on the ground, which is now coming to an end. There might be one or two relatively minor schemes in comparison that will get started early in the new year, but they're being added in because of the good management of the programme. And so we're seeing, I think, a very successful programme delivery there, which in partnership with bus operators and WICA, we will seek to find awards around that programme in the near future. I suppose the final comment from me, though, is one of concern going forward. We've seen some really good investment for public transport, walking and cycling in recent years through government grant in particular. Just concerned about what that's looking like in the years coming forward, because some of the opportunities that we were hoping for don't seem to be coming forward. And so we need to be working very closely with all parties, particularly WICA, obviously, to secure that funding through government grant to continue that work, particularly to meet our climate emergency targets of 2030. So I'll probably leave it there, Chair, and open up for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Are there any of our other guests? Paul, and please signify if you want to contribute before I open it up to members of the board.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I certainly don't want to repeat the comments Dave has made. I think just make two observations. One is in terms of the BSIP, I've gone on record of publicly commending the Combined Authority for both the level of ambition shown in the BSIP and indeed the level of collaboration which operators have had generally through the process in BSIP. It is a very ambitious document and a very, very good document, and clearly First are involved in quite a few other BSIPs up and down the country, and the West Yorkshire one is very, very ambitious indeed. It is, of course, a long-term vision, a long-term plan starting from April. And of course, it does rely upon significant funding, the outcome of which, as Dave has said, will not be known probably until early in the new year. And I think the particular slide that Dave showed, and I'm glad he did, about the short-term challenges are very, very real. And I'd scribbled them down, but thankfully Dave had already mentioned them, but I will just highlight them again. Firstly, around funding, and this is because our regulators are making it up as we go along to some extent, in that as things stand currently, we as operators will have to declare to our regulatory body, the traffic commissioners, what our network should be in April. We have to declare that in January in advance of knowing exactly what the level of funding will be. And that presents us with enormous challenges, and clearly there are industry discussions going on to try to flex that to ensure that the two things are aligned in terms of what that recovery funding, if any, is going to be beyond March 22, and what the level of network that we then would need to operate. So that the funding challenge is very, very real. The second one Dave mentioned also, again, perhaps I do need to just briefly speak about the staffing position, which is impacting currently upon service delivery. And Dave mentioned the fact that as operators, we've all taken our individual stances about how we address the position, which has really come about because of the headline grabbing logistics sector, which has obviously attracted the media attention, and that has had an effect upon movement of staff into that sector from bus driving. But also it's about the general economic mobility of staff that we are seeing and is being generally seen in many employment sectors. To mitigate those, what we've done obviously is we've just introduced quite a significant pay settlement for our driving staff here in Leeds. We've obviously got recruitment incentives, and we have actually had to take some very, very difficult decisions when we want to try to recover the network and our volumes, to cut back some of the high frequency services to try to save some resource. So that position is stabilizing, I'm pleased to say, and the pipeline of new drivers coming through remains still very, very strong. I think the third one, which Dave didn't mention, which is probably just also worth highlighting, is that our current volumes on bus are actually slightly higher than Dave's quoted. They're probably 75 to 80% now, which is very, very good news. But what we're seeing is actually traffic volumes on the road, car traffic volumes, have probably increased almost up to 100%. And so that never, of course, has an effect upon punctuality and reliability, and whether or not we have to add more resources in to maintain the network. Now, hopefully that's a short-term thing and partly a legacy of the discouragement of travel by bus. But hopefully, as we begin to recover, we can shift that balance back to back to bus travel rather than the car travel. So I think I just wanted to highlight those short-term challenges are very real before we get to the very exciting ambition showed by the BSIP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start by, before I speak about the BSIP and the funding that we've received on other bids, just thanking all the people who work on transport, who have been on the front line throughout COVID and continue to go out on the front line on a daily basis. They don't have, you know, the choice of working from home or going on Zoom, but they've been out there. And I can count on my hand, you know, the number of complaints on one hand, the number of complaints that I had. We got all those key workers to work and back and continue to do so. But also we managed, thank you to the operators, to get 22,000 young people to education establishments right across West Yorkshire. So I think, you know, on behalf of our elected members, that we put that on record and say thank you to them. I just want to build on, because franchising and the enhanced partnership, it sounds easy and a lot of, you know, there's a lot of work that needs to go on behind it, and we've got a small team at IIIG. And we have to focus on delivering the best service right across West Yorkshire for the people who are using public transport. With that in mind, from an elected member point of view, if the enhanced partnership doesn't work, we have to have a really robust case to prove that the partnership hasn't worked. And that is going to be expensive. I don't want to mislead members by letting them think that this happens overnight. Manchester, I think, is on either year 5 or year 6 of their franchising journey. And I think there is a bigger question, and I really welcome this type of inquiry to the government, because the subsidies that have come down for rail has been in the billions. It just feels like bus is the poor relation at some point in some parts of the funding bids that have come through. I also want to highlight members that there's a report going to Transport for London this week, a financial report, highlighting that the bus model is broken, and financially the bus industry, even though London had that extensive subsidy, were really struggling because they didn't increase prices. So we have to get the model exactly right, as will be set up to fail. In the financial report that's going to for Transport for London this week, it's highlighting that they will have to probably withdraw 200 routes and maybe reduce 300 bus services. So we are at London, we're West Yorkshire, and we need the right model for West Yorkshire. The funding that's come down, you will have heard a lot about funding from Transforming Cities, which was 370 million. LIPTIP spent 270 million. CRSTS, we got 830 million. But I would say my first overview of all that funding that's dropped into West Yorkshire is that it's not going to go very far, and there's going to be some really difficult choices to make for leaders. The government has said that there is more money to come, so we have to focus on that. But to deliver everything that we're talking about today, bus is still the biggest mover of people, and West Yorkshire absolutely has recovered quicker than most places in the country outside of London. And that's because our people use the bus and they rely on it for work, the type of work they do. And also people with disabilities would be lost without this type of system. So it's not all clear cut. Later on, I will touch on the successes. We haven't been, you know, sat on our hands at IIIG, even though we've only got a small team. There's so much going on that we should be proud of. But I really welcome your inquiry. I'm going to put it on the Transport Committee, Scrutiny Committee. There's a Scrutiny Committee at IIIG. We cannot let them use public money. I hope that you can work with them and share your work. I don't see any point in them doing the same inquiry when you've been going since 2016. And I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Kim. I'm sure we all echo the sentiments that you expressed earlier about the wonderful frontline work of transport workers during the pandemic, which of course is still with us. Do any other guests at the table want to contribute? Yeah.
I just wouldn't mind, Chair. So, yeah, Alex from Transdev. So, just perspective. So, we're largely a regional operator. We've got 500 buses in the north of England, half of which are in Yorkshire, and Leeds is a key operating centre for us. I completely echo what both Councillor Groves and Paul has said in terms of the short-term challenges, but the ambition and the passion, as you can see, that we all have for buses now as our partnership, and we're desperate for that to continue. I think we do need to overcome these short-term difficulties that we've got, and I think we are heading into I think what will be a challenge in November and December, when you combine the increase in congestion with the ability to, or it's going to be more difficult to obviously manage punctuality when you've got a driver shortage. And like as Paul says, it's across the whole sector. It's not focused on one company or even on transport. It's all around us. The way we are dealing with this is being upfront with our customers. And as you can see by the recovery figures, which are above benchmark for anywhere else in the UK, our customers are coming with us because we're informing them and we're looking after them and they're responding to us. So we have also had to step back and reduce timetables, but we have still seen customer numbers grow, and we have seen very few complaints because people, I think if you're upfront with them, they understand the position, and they particularly showed their gratefulness to the frontline teams in the way that Kim has articulated as well. So I think there is little else to say, but I think the fact that we're saying similar things, I think proves that we're embracing these challenges together and trying to overcome them together for the betterment of the overall system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. And again, just to echo what Alex, Councillor Groves and Paul have said, now, I just want to make the point that I think Councillor Groves had articulated this fantastically. We have to remember that, I was going to say we're coming out of a global pandemic. We're actually still in a global pandemic, of course, and bus services never stopped during the pandemic. And I work for the trade body. I don't directly work in bus operations. I work with the operators, but behind the scenes with government, with local authorities, with bus operators, so much work has happened in the last 18 months to ensure that key workers have been able to get to work, that bus services have been available for those who've needed them at times and places where they've needed them. But not only that, we've had funding mechanisms to work through with the government, which has been quite thankfully supporting the industry. But at the same time, we've also been looking forward with the bus service improvement plans and the enhanced partnership. So I would just like to add to the reassurance, there's been an awful lot of work in the last 18 months and keeping services running, but we're very much looking forward to the future in what we can do together. And I always feel that bus services are always delivered in partnership, no matter what the model is. Bus operators operate on other people's roads. They serve other people's retail. They serve other people's hospitality. They serve the wider economy. So it's a shared endeavour for operators, the local authority, and the economy for buses to work, to be there for local people, and to be successful and continue that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add Ariva's comments to this as well. Not too much to be said beyond what my colleagues have offered, other than to throw our weight behind it, throw our support. The BSIP plan is ambitious, it's transformative, and it's something that we want to deliver. We recognise that there is always more to be done to improve the bus service. Working together in a partnership, we will have better ways of being able to provide quicker bus journeys, provide a service that's more reliable, provide incentives to encourage people onto public transport. And so we're fully supportive of everything that this plan aims to deliver. And let's hope we get the funding that we need.
Okay, thank you for that. I think board members have been talked at for quite long enough now, so I'm going to open it up to them for questions and comments. And I've got Councillor Buckley first in order.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just start with two questions, please. And they both relate directly, actually, to what Gary said and Mr. Matthews about various things. And the first one is that on page 21 of our papers, there's a section here which is headed Position October 2020 about the delivery of low emission buses. Now, Gary mentioned that, and others, how extensive the LP tip highways work has been, and we all know it. It sometimes feels as if the whole city's being altered a little bit. And obviously, a lot of taxpayers' money, one way and another, has been spent on that. But what made me want to ask this question is that in that paragraph 3 from the bottom, mentioning that 2/3 of the 284 buses have been delivered. And I remember the former Councillor Blake saying, oh, well, this is a partnership, this is a commitment, we'll do all the infrastructure and you give us the buses, 284 of them. But it says here, given the current and uncertain financial position in the bus sector, details of future bus deliveries of the remaining 90 vehicles are still to be finalised. So that's my first question. Are those 90 still going to be delivered, and when? And then question 2, if I may, Chair, is referring to page 65. And I get a little bit confused about patronage numbers, because Dave knows I've brought this subject up once or twice on the Transport Committee. But if you look at the table here, which is key performance indicators and targets, it gives passenger numbers in March 2019 as roughly 11 million. And in March 2021, 4.5 billion, which is obviously well down, which we all know the reasons for that. But then in the next column, 2025, the target is 2019 levels plus 15%. But if you actually do a little bit of arithmetic, it means that the target is 12 million and a bit passengers, which is an increase on where we are now of 280%. And I just wondered whether somebody could tell me whether that's in any way achievable or whether it's really unrealistic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. I think the answer to your first question is actually in the section of the report, given the current position, but officers may want to elucidate on that. So who's going to pitch in? Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't pretend to answer the second question, but I will certainly try to address the first question about the 90 vehicles. You're quite correct, Councillor Buckley. This was a partnership commitment that we went into with the city, and it was a very big commitment of £71 million on behalf of First to deliver the 284 vehicles. What, of course, it's not an excuse, it's just a reality. In the period between March 2020 and September 2021, we have, of course, been in a regime where we haven't been able to make any profit whatsoever because the government's grant funding was such that it reimbursed you up to a break-even position, and therefore you were not allowed to make any provision for any investment within that period of time. We're now in a new funding regime where we are now able to begin to make a profit, and therefore we are beginning to replan our investment plans going forward. And you may well have seen a commitment that First has made to not buying any more diesel vehicles. There will be electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles from the beginning of next year. The commitment to the 90 vehicles remains. It's a partnership commitment. We will not renege on that. The timing, however, of its delivery is still a bit uncertain because of this changing funding regime. We would expect a third of them to be delivered during the course of 21-22. The remaining 2/3, I would hope, during the following year, but those orders have not as of yet been placed, but the partnership commitment stands, and we just want to get to a position where the volume of people travelling by bus can generate us a reasonable return for us to deliver upon that commitment.
So basically, the comment on page 21 that says delivery of the remaining 90 vehicles is expected by the end of 21-22 is inaccurate.
That is correct. It would, a proportion of them will be in that time frame.
A third, yeah.
About a third will in that time frame, but the remaining 2/3 I would expect to be the following year.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul.
Chair, if I can address the second question on patronage, and it may be the way the table's looking actually. The number, the 11 million number against March 19 is an annual figure for 2018-19. The 4.5 million is what it looked like in 2021, which obviously reflects the fact that I think around across the whole year, 40% of normal bus patronage was experienced because of the pandemic. So I think whereas as we've said, is we're in this sort of 70% to 80% place now, and that does differ a little bit in different parts of the West Yorkshire, I'd have to say. So we're in a much better place than the 4.5, but not back to 2019 levels by any means. So the 2025 target is saying, well, actually, if we say we're 20% off target at the moment, we want to increase it by 15%, then we've got sort of 35 to 40% to make up. So it is a challenging target, but you do need to set challenging targets to set policies behind them.
And it's probably a little less challenging than the previous target that I know you've often referred to, Neil. Do you want to come back on anything, Neil?
Not really, Chair. Safe to say that the 2030 carbon neutrality target is obviously impacted by this kind of thing. And if it was ever realistic, this makes it even more unrealistic.
Okay, we'll take that as a comment. Councillor Wadsworth.
Expected it to be a queue, Chair. Two comments and questions really. One is around service levels and one is around patronage. You do say that the patronage is back to 75% of pre-COVID levels, but in 2019 we were seeing around the city a lot of standing loads with buses. I never see that now, and I don't even know whether you would actually allow standing loads now under the current rules. So I think, well, possibly they're all using park and rides, but then I go out to Ellen Road and I find that half of Ellen Road is for vaccinations and half of that half is used, but half of it is empty, despite the fact that when we expanded that, we were using all that expansion on the rough stuff before we expanded it. So we didn't expect to be able to get more cars in. So I go to Temple Green and I think perhaps they're all there. And I find that half of that is over to testing and the other half is empty and the other half is used. So they're not in park and rides. And, you know, it's around I don't see the commuters coming in. And what are you going to do to bring that patronage back? Because a lot of work needs to really be done with businesses, because when I talk to people who are going back to the office, I say, you're going back to the office and you're going back on the bus. They say, oh no, my employer is allowing me to park at work, so I'm going back by car. That doesn't help the bus operators or the bus service or climate, really, that they're all going back to using the car. So it's how you're going to grow that part of the business going forward. And the second thing is around service levels. I also see service levels in my own area being reduced dramatically outside the commuter period, and buses that are running frequently all running the same part of the hour rather than spread across the hour. I understand why that is, but it doesn't help the commuter when they want to use that other part of the hour to get places. And you did talk about you had reduced the beginning and end part of the service day, and you needed to grow that again. And I'll just share this with you. A couple of Saturday nights ago, I wanted to make a journey, and I thought I'll just see if I can make it by bus. And to do 7 miles as I would have driven it was going to take me 1 hour and 57 minutes by bus. And I'd have to do a bit of walking as well. That didn't enthuse me to take that option. And so I went to another option. And that's, I appreciate the 7 miles is not going the route you were going to take me by bus. But it doesn't help the fact that that can be done by going 7 miles rather than taking the route, and how you're going to grow those passengers back onto the bus, because obviously I'm now off the bus for that journey and off the bus for most journeys. And the only reason that I wouldn't drive that journey is because the activity that I wanted to take place, the law wouldn't allow me to drive and take that activity in. But if you'd encouraged me back for that journey, I might have stuck to that journey regularly, and now never come back to that. And so it's how you grow that part of the business, because the commuter business is not there at the moment. So how do you drive the what I would say leisure travel?
Who's going to begin the response to those questions?
Okay. Just a few general comments then. So I think, our perception of full buses is that you're right, the peaks have flattened, so to speak, and we are seeing a lot more leisure customers come back compared to commuter customers come back, although the commuters now do seem to be coming back in greater numbers than they were previously, but they're not giving us full buses, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The things that we're doing, that I think all of us are doing, is there's a lot more flexible ticketing than there used to be. So you don't have to buy a weekly ticket to get a saving on traveling every day. You can buy a multi-journey ticket or a multi-day ticket, all as bundles, all can be bought via an app or indeed on bus. We've certainly been doing a lot of work to make up for the decline of commuter travel by doing more in terms of leisure, both in terms of pricing, marketing. Indeed, we doubled our network on Coastliner out to Scarborough and the coast over the summer as well. So there are things still happening, even though we're in this sort of these strange times. The other thing worth mentioning, particularly when it comes to evening fares, is that we've had a £1 evening fare after 7 o'clock now since July. We're committing that remains until the end of December. And that has done a lot of that trade has certainly is on weekends has grown to almost 100% plus. So people are reacting to that. And of course we had capacity then available too. So again, that's not resulted in full buses, it's resulted in just busier buses than what was there. So I think the main point just to say is that whilst we're in this situation, as Paul says, where we haven't been able to make a profit, and even now we're still producing a fairly minimal profit, we're still making sure we're being as innovative as we can to grow customer numbers back. And just quickly on the former question, the one thing that we didn't allude to is that as part of the enhanced partnership and the BSIP commitments, all operators have committed to investing in zero emission buses over the next 4 to 5 years, all of which will see service in Leeds as well. So that's another way as to how we're again committing to investment, even in quite difficult times. Great.
Councillor Groves.
Yeah, in terms of the park and ride, I travelled in from Elland Road this morning, but got stuck in congestion on the way to Elland Road. And you're right, the first car park is just full, but I mean, that is good in comparison to a couple of weeks ago when you were going and there were only a few rows full. So people are slowly coming back, but as we've said, the leisure market is much stronger. What we're doing, so we've at Wyker, with the operators, we've launched a young people's ticket, which is only 60p single fare. And there was a 91% young people got onto public transport. So that's a good return. We've launched our M-Card app so people can book online because we know that the peaks have changed. We know the patterns are differently. Where is the peak is the data that we need to find. And that went from, we didn't do any marketing. It went from 23% straight up to 80% in terms of booking, making it easy for people. We have worked with the Department of Work and Pensions, so job seekers actually can make it easy for them to get across the region. They have to go into an office and have their funds loaded on. We've made it so that they don't have to do that. We are working on gifting so that families can load onto cards for gifting for travel. So there's lots of initiatives going on, but it's going to be a long journey back. And obviously we're still dealing with the pandemic, but there's lots of work going on. And also we've introduced demand responsive transport, which I think we promised you at the last meeting. So we've done it.
Thank you, Kim. Anyone else? Gary? Oh, sorry, bringing Councillor Hayden and then Gary.
Gary may be saying a similar thing to me, but just on Ellen Road and the vaccination, we made that decision in consultation with the football club, with Leeds United. They requested, and I'm sure Gary will go into more details, but they requested that we move it out of their conference suite. So we did sacrifice some of the car parking at Ellen Road Park and Ride, but that was a decision that I was happy to take. We want to support the, our numbers are going up as we speak in terms of COVID-19, and we wanted to support the ongoing response to the pandemic and keeping people in Leeds safe and well. So yes, we made that decision, but the football club needed their conference suite back with the restarting of people attending football matches. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Gary?
Thank you, Chair. It's really just to back up that the park and ride numbers are increasing. I see the numbers every week, and several hundred are coming in across the 3 sites every week, which is really good to see. I think there's a role for all of us really, though, in terms of communicating how safe it is to use public transport. And because there are still clearly people that are nervous for whatever reason. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, if we get the opportunity, to highlight the strenuous efforts that the bus operators take to clean the buses and make them safe. And I certainly use the park and rides when I come in on my 2 or 3 days a week, and it feels very safe. It does feel very different from when it before COVID, because there was it was standing room only on occasions, and it was a bit uncomfortable on those occasions. It's very different at the moment, but I think if all of us can play our part in getting that message out, that public transport, be it bus, train, is safe, and leave your car at home if it's viable to use public transport. It's not always. So I just wanted to make that point really, because I think it's important.
Okay, thank you. Paul, do you want to come back?
Just to say to Councillor Hayden, I wasn't questioning the decision to bring vaccinations or testing. I was just making the point that that used to be covered with cars and now it isn't. And if the car park at Ellen Road, Councillor Groves, is full today, I'll be going out that way this afternoon. I'll have a look, because I've never seen it full. And it certainly wasn't full last Wednesday or Thursday. When
I said the first half of it was full, and I'll travel back with you.
Now there's an offer you can't possibly refuse.
And just to the point about the length of journeys that are done by bus, the time it takes, referencing the car. And I would just say that First is my primary operator in my area. Transdev only operate the airport service in my area. And whilst the pound is very useful, it's not a lot of times we want to get to the airport these days, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody for your presentations and comments, responses, etc. 2 questions for me. In terms of a fully accessible service, we have got this problem of access for wheelchairs capacity, and prams as well, of course. How do we plan to crack that really? Because you need the person in a wheelchair needs to be able to get on that bus that arrives, just like a person not in a wheelchair can, because they may be getting to work, etc. And the second question, I'm intrigued by the M-Card app, the tracking, which I think will be very useful. And we know that technology works. I think a lot of delivery companies use it, and at the end of the street with your takeaway and you're at the door. So if we can do that for the M-Card app, why can't we use that same technology for the real-time displays? They're a constant cause of frustration when you see the 3 minutes expected time, 2 minutes, and then suddenly it's 5 minutes, and then it disappears. I've witnessed that my constituents have witnessed that as well and continually complain about it. So can we have that technology for those real-time displays as well, please?
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. And the phantom bus syndrome is something that I think we've addressed at every meeting, and it would be nice for it to be resolved. But Dave, are you coming in first on this?
Yes, I think on wheelchair capacity, the buses they comply with the national standard, but I think that there are challenges at times, and I think we're aware of them when several people want to travel at the same time, and I think that's been taken forward both at national level and to have vehicles that have more adaptability for the different types of situations that they face, because they can be very different in terms of the number of people boarding with pushchairs and other luggage at the same time as wheelchairs. So I think it is a bit of an imperfect solution, if we're honest. There's only so much space on at the lower deck of a bus to accommodate everybody. So but there is probably some design solutions ultimately that are needed to increase that flexibility as far as it can. Just on the tracking is quite an interesting observation. I mean, yes, we have had discussions at these meetings before around the real-time information system. I mean, firstly, it's the same system that provides the tracked information. The difference is you can see where the bus is on a map and the phone, and I think people generally welcome that and give them some reassurance where the bus is. The real-time displays on the street can shift around, because if a bus does get stuck in traffic or it's always just trying to predict the time that bus arrives at that particular stop. So it can look to go backwards sometimes because of the road conditions, that it's sort of worked out, oh, it's going to take longer than previous because it's stuck in at a road junction. The disappearing ghost phantom bus thing, we've done quite a lot of work with bus operators. We're in the process of actually changing the whole back office system to that manage this. Some of this is really around how the process under which buses register into the system and come off the system. What we have done, regrettably, in some respects, is we've but we have done in recent weeks as part of this process, sort of expanded the facility whereby bus operators, if they have to cancel a service because of driver shortages and the things that people have said earlier, then we get that information onto the screen as quickly as possible, so at least people know that. And I think it gets back to what Alex was saying, is in people's tolerance is greater if we actually explain the situation better to them. So we are dealing with the technical issues that sit behind that phantom bus thing, but I think we still have, and I would say this possibly, but we still have probably one of the most extensive and stable bus real-time systems in the country, in this region, and we're investing in it as we speak to make it better.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to add to that, I mean, it's a bit more hotter off the press, but on the space for wheelchairs issue, it will actually be part of the legality of the vehicle that 2 wheelchair spaces will be needed on buses now. So at the moment, most of us have on our buses, we have a space for a wheelchair with a cushion and a backrest, and 2 will be needed now. So it's likely that will be a shared space, but the point is that we should now be able to carry 2 wheelchairs on new buses when the new build requirements come in. So that's one thing that will really help that. I was in discussions with bus users yesterday, as was Bus Users UK, alongside representatives from all the operators, around what can we do to give people with wheelchairs more certainty of knowing they'll be able to get on the bus. So there are a number of ideas that were being drafted out, as well as a clearer policy nationally to present on that. We all have, I think, between all 3 operators, we all have capacity information available on our app, so you can see whether buses are busy or not, extending that to whether the wheelchair space is taken as well, so people can see whether the bus has already a wheelchair already in the space or not. And also as well, the ability for people to signify they want to get on a certain bus if they have difficulties hailing the bus, or indeed they have difficulties requesting to get off the bus. So all that technology we're trying to work on with the app provider and the ticket machine providers to try and improve the experience for those people in wheelchairs or those people who have walking difficulties and so on. And indeed, further to that as well is extending that information is also on the real-time system as well in terms of capacity. And Dave's right, you know, I know often we look over the Pennines to Manchester, the comprehensiveness of our real-time system in West Yorkshire, I know because I run buses in Greater Manchester as well, pales in comparison what happens there compared to what happens here. So there are a number of things we do much better, and indeed compared to London as well, we should add to. So.
Helen, just the on-demand transport as well, which is operating in East Leeds, which is proving really popular, but disabled people, families can book that and book themselves, you know, a wheelchair space so that they are, and it will be within 200 metres of their home, either drop off or pick up. I know it's only East Leeds at the moment, but I'm really hopeful that it will be developed across the city, and that people with mobility issues and families with young children and indeed a variety of users will be able to benefit from that on-demand transport. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Kevin, do you want to come back on anything? Okay, I've got councillors Bentley, Dye and Buckley. So Katie. Sorry, Jonathan.
Oh.
Fair's fair, Jonathan.
You're being very chivalrous, Chair, you know, ladies first. But
no, I was just being.
But then I thought
I was just being blind and unable to read my own writing, basically.
Yeah, thanks for a really good presentation and all the reports. This is my first year on this scrutiny, so I may be talking about something that you've discussed before, and there are lots of questions I could ask, but I'm just going to restrict it really to sort of the nub of what any service is about. And I ask this question for any service that the council is offering or the public sector is offering, is what is the customer experiencing, and trying to get out of this what the customers are experiencing. And on page 51, we have a description or a few bullet points of existing bus services. And the ones I particularly sort of pick up is one that says a network that's difficult to use, not meeting travellers' needs, a perception of poor value for money, and a network which is consistently not reliable or not consistently reliable. And certainly the feedback I get from my residents, my constituents, reflects all that. So my question really is, well, get into the guts of all this, you can give me lots of detail, but how are we actually measuring what your customers, our customers are experiencing, and how are we responding to it, and how we measure that? So on table 6 on page 65 of the pack, we've got some measurement of customer satisfaction on a score 1 to 10, and the baseline in March 2021 was 6.9, which intuitively I'd say, if you said that 6.9 out of 10 satisfaction, I'd say it's way too high based on what people tell me about the satisfaction with the bus service. I'm just wondering, is that a WICA measure, or is that an amalgamation of operators' measures? And what are operators' measures on satisfaction based on those issues which the existing bus service, reliability, meeting the traveller's needs, and value for money? And unless we're getting that right, all the other things don't really matter, do they? Because that's what actually drives forward the bus service, is what the customer wants and whether the customer is going to use it or not. And there's sort of two ways you can make you can make the bus service very attractive against those parameters which you've listed, or you can make the alternative very uncomfortable. So, you know, you can make traveling by road so difficult that people will have to come to that. So that's a political decision in a way. But I'm just wondering how we're actually getting, how we measuring what our customers, what our residents are really experiencing, and how we are listening to them. Because that's what sorry, Chair, this is becoming a speech, I'm sorry. But the main issue I get from residents talking to me is, yes, they understand the issues, but no one is telling them about them. No, it's difficult to get that information out of bus operators or out of the combined authority. So it's that contact with the customer as well. Bit of comment, bit of question there, Chair.
Okay, Dave, do you want to lead off on that?
Yes, I can do. Just to explain three elements really to measuring customer satisfaction and the basic information that's in the bus service improvement plan. Firstly, there's a national body established by government called Transport Focus, and Transport Focus essentially is the representative body for transport users, and so it's a sort of consumer body, if you like, Transport Focus. And one of the things that organisation does is a national bus survey, and asks bus passengers quite a detailed set of questions nationally, and as a region we top up that survey, and have done in the past anyway, we top up that survey to get a bigger sample size across West Yorkshire, so that we've got we can use that as a very much of a base. And I think what that tells us is and some of the narrative that's in the bus service improvement plan about the issues people have with the bus service is comparatively in this region, for example, people feel they get less value for money than the same question asked in other regions. So that's telling us something. I think the other sort of baseline information which we've used in the plan is the fairly extensive public engagement that was done back in 2017 for the original West Yorkshire bus strategy, where we did a variety of different activities to engage with people and get their views on what the bus service was. And so some of that narrative around value for money and around people's confidence in the service comes from that as well. And it's uncomfortable reading for all of us who are involved in it, but it's something we've got to face head on, really. Finally, the table of indicators and the 6.7 score, as a combined authority, we've done for quite a few years now something called a tracker survey, which is largely a telephone survey, where we ask a series of questions around lots of aspects of transport and how people get around, not just bus services. And we ask users and non-users and put that together. It's not a massive sample, but it's a tracker survey for the purposes of being able to ask the same question year on year and year and year and see the interesting thing is the shift, really. The 6.7 score, which is about 67% of people were satisfied broadly are very satisfied with the bus service. That includes users and non-users, and that's a representative sample. What that plan's seeking to do is to bring that up to 8 ultimately, and actually getting movement in those sort of scores is not as easy as it sounds. So it's not so much whether or not 60% of people really are satisfied or not, and I absolutely get what the council is saying in terms of how does that relate to people's anecdotal evidence. But what it is saying, well, actually, we've got to turn 20% of those people who are dissatisfied into satisfied. That's the challenge, and that's what that table is seeking to achieve.
I think just to add to that, I mean, certainly we are trying to mirror what other customer-facing organisations are doing these days in terms of measurement. So If when you travel by bus, you on Thursday, you have an access to a QR code where you can record your satisfaction score. So we have a measure in the same way as Amazon do, and I'm sure other operators do, of a net promoter score, which we certainly aim to aspire to a similar level to an Amazon or any other sort of retail environment. So I think that the way we measure customer satisfaction, which was historically purely based upon number of complaints per 100,000 passengers, I think have gone. We are now trying to, in addition to what Dave has outlined and the formal surveys, we do try to capture data in real time from our customers in the same way when you walk to an airport, you have a smiley face or an unhappy face. So this is our way of doing it on board vehicles at the moment.
We also work with the Transport Focus, who provide a lot of data for us and do a lot of work for us. One thing I would say, and I said it at the beginning, we're not London, we're West Yorkshire. And when we are working on these surveys, I'll just give you two very different sort of scenarios. So the ward that myself and Councillor Trustwell represent, there's a bus every 12 minutes. It runs from Middleton to Roundhay. It's a high volume route. But actually, if that bus gets stuck in congestion, then people do complain. We get the different complaints right across West Yorkshire. In Calderdale, where on some routes and some rural routes, there's only a bus every hour. If there's a shortage of drivers on that morning and we have to pull a bus, it's very different. It's a very different landscape to manage. In terms of what do we want to exceed customers' expectations. If we'd have had the same sort of subsidy that the capital had had, then I'd probably have no complaints. And it's all down to that financial model, and that financial model working for your geography, working for your customer, and just using that data to understand your customer. And hopefully, you know, I'd like to think out of the 3 billion, we'd get 300 million in the bus improvement service plan. But I won't build my hopes up. But that it's all around that, you know, the more we can spend on services. But even when you've got a bus that turns up every 12 minutes on high volume routes, on fares, I think the fares are the big thing for people. People talk to me about it be, you know, good value for money, what they can afford to pay. And because obviously there's many routes disappeared over there, and we're trying to build that network back up, you often find, and I know the operators are doing some work on this, that some of our poorest people pay the most. So I think there's got to be a change.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
Just to add the point on Transport Focus as well, as Dave said, they are the independent watchdog, and it's also worth saying that they do sit on the Alliance board as well, and they do challenge us from the customer perspective as well as the fact that they do their annual survey. It's also worth reminding ourselves as well that the overall survey results in terms of satisfaction of customers, in terms of those satisfied and very satisfied, is in the mid to high 80s, which I know, talking to retailers, they would kill for those kind of figures, and indeed the rail industry would kill for those kind of figures. So I think if we were to all look at complaints and listen to those who complain, which indeed we do, because they're nuggets of gold and they help us improve, but actually if we balance that out against the number of people who have an unremarkable or remarkable for positive reasons journey, actually, as it balances out, we're not actually doing a bad job.
Okay, Jonathan, you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks. I think that shows quite a high level of complacency, to be honest, because we're not talking about the 80% who are satisfied, we're talking about the 20% who aren't, and even those numbers, they're based on mass surveys and everything else. The nub of my question really was how do we know what the customer is experiencing on the number 6 bus that goes to Cookwick? And if there's dissatisfaction on there, how are we capturing it? Or if someone's telling us about it, how are we capturing it and dealing with it? How are we making it easy for that customer to actually get in touch with the operator or get in touch with Wyker and say what the problem is? You know, this is about individuals' lives. It's not about a big mass of people that, you know, might not even be bus users or might be occasional bus users. This is about the individual. And could, for example, from your surveys on First Bus and your QR codes, etc., could you tell me the level of satisfaction there is on an individual route at a time?
Okay, Paul.
Well, certainly the benefit of having that sort of system is you can do that exactly. Of course, it will depend upon the sample size, but people have the ability on an individual journey to feedback, and that information is captured both in terms of a score, but more importantly, if they've got a verbatim comment, if there's a particular comment they want to make, either positive or negative about the driver or the reliability, they can make it for the number 6 bus or number 1 bus, and that is recorded on our database and is reviewed. And as you quite rightly say, it's no good just being sat there unless something is actually done about the information. And that's why we have the system in place. But there will always be, or is often a reason for whatever has gone wrong. And it's important that we look at it and we try and correct it. But no, to answer your question, yes, that information is available.
Yeah, and I think the point you were making, Jonathan, is the generic averages are fine, but they can mask a multitude of individual specific localized problems. I think it might be helpful if we could have some information, not now, but in future, about how that's addressed. Councillor Dye.
Thank you. In the report we've got in section 2.6.9, it makes reference to a book called Invisible Women, which I highly recommend. If anybody's not read it, I think everybody should read it. It's a really fascinating study of how women's lives are often very different in lots of ways to do with technology, transport. But focusing on the transport issue, one of the points that the book makes is that it's often women who have more complex transport needs because of childcare and different trips that they might be making throughout the day. So in the plan, it says that the Combined Authorities' ambition is to understand this problem in more detail, identify and deliver possible solutions. So my first question is, how does the authority plan to understand this problem in more detail? And then my second question relates to something, Helen, you were talking about a little bit earlier, that I think the Flexibus has probably got quite an important part to play in addressing this. And it's great to see it in East Leeds. It's hopefully having an impact. And so my second question was, it's early days, really early days, but have we got any data rather than just anecdotal things that are all over Facebook in East Leeds at the minute? Have we got any data on how the uptake is going of the Flexibus? And hoping that it's successful, are there any concrete plans to roll that out rather than just general plans? Because I think it'd be great to see it across the city.
Okay, Helen.
Thank you. And I actually went to the Grand Theatre to see Caroline Corrado Perez and a talk by her. And Gary was going to hate me, but I'm going to bring gritting up. And the gender bias when now gritting. Sorry, Gary. Because everybody looked around at me when she mentioned Sweden and the way that gritted in terms of male journeys rather than female journeys. So, and you're right, the complexity of women's and it's not just women, thankfully, anymore. A lot of men do childcare and the school run and things like that. But there is that gender bias. And I think the gritters in Sweden were, I think the council in Sweden that undertook a gender equality assessment, they thought that, oh, we'll be all right with gritting, and they really weren't. So yes, I think the Flexibus is a big part of just the fact that, you know, all the different generations can get on the same bus, people with, you know, and book it to go to somewhere like Temple Newsome or Seacroft shopping centre. And I know a lot of regular buses go, but if you live in say Halton Moor, getting to even Cross Gates is, you know, you have to go generally out to Selby Road. So having that flexibility of the flexibus and linking it to our leisure and to the hospitals. And I know a lot of people, and anecdotally, and I'll hand over to Councillor Groves for the actual data on it, but I'm getting the same on Facebook, that people are really loving it, especially for St James's. So just to respond to that, I'm really pleased, and I've actually photographed during this meeting those paragraphs and sent it to Councillor Heselwood and Garthwaite, that I'm really pleased that the WICA are looking at this gender issue, and I've actually quoted that fabulous book, and I look forward to hearing the plan as well.
Councillor Groves.
So firstly, we do extensive work with employers. We have a travel plan network team to understand when there's new roles coming into the city or across West Yorkshire, what those shift patterns are going to look like. And we've also had a trial for just outside of Shepperton and Elmet, where we had an industrial site that didn't have any transport, and Joseph Roundtree brought that to our attention. Hiring, you know, over 1,000, enabling 1,000 people to go to work by public transport. I think the biggest challenge we've got is understanding the new working patterns and caring responsibilities. In terms of, this comes into the inclusive role of what are we going to do to keep women safe, and that's been one of the Mayor's pledges, and I know Dave will come in on some ideas around the M card, but certainly on the rail industry do lead the way in terms of keeping women safe. They have the refuge to rail, where a woman can, you know, be identified, and we'll get them out of the city by any mode of transport. So we do a lot of work around that. DRT is a good solution. And I don't want to spoil the party, but as someone who has to deliver it and cost it up, it's not been successful in any other parts of the country. The model is really expensive. So it's the same cost to run that small bus as it is a double decker. The only difference is you can get 70 plus people on a double decker bus. So financially, we have got to look at that model, and funding streams need to be there to continue that type of model. I do feel that it is a good model. There's Arriva Click, which is a very different model to ours in Liverpool. We have stretched the boundaries on the DRT to include St James's, to drive up those numbers, and it's up to 100 people a day that are using it. So that's a good sign. But I think we're a long way off being, right, this is what this model costs. Where else can we put it geographically? I think Calderdale was the next place that we've pledged to put this type of model. But it's something that we need to build on. We have had a community bus within our ward before that didn't have any take up, and myself and Councillor Trustwell, it was something that the community wanted. So there's a lot of things to learn from this, because we had to pull our bus. But I think the DRT model is interesting, but I do think it has to be tied to something like a rail station or hospital, an anchor organisation where you've got volumes of people to make sure that you've got the patronage on that bus. There's all sorts of different models. Alex might want to talk about the Moose that they operate in Burnley, and other operators. Dwayne and myself got a meeting this week to see how we can make sure that the timetable as a pilot of a bus meets the timetable of rail. So you're getting that integrated connectivity. So there's lots of things going on, but the women's thing, I'm just going to bring Dave in on what we're going to do on the M card.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is really a start of sort of accepting and understanding that people need to make complex journeys, and that the public transport has tended to take lots of people to the same place at the same time and then take them home again. And that's sort of the problem that's been identified here, and that life isn't like that anymore. And I think that's one of the things which we do need to look at. And there's different ways. We talked about demand responsive transport and something sort of flexibus type of operation. I think we also need to look at ticketing, because if people need to make journeys in different legs to go to childcare or other sort of things that they do during the day, then they shouldn't be penalised by having to pay more just because they're getting on and off the bus more than one side of the way. And it's those sort of things we need to get into, as well as actually understanding maybe a little bit more about where people are going to and the sort of locations of the things that they need to do. And so it's a little bit of an identification of an issue and a problem, and to try and sort of factor that thinking into finding the solutions. In terms of more immediate things, we've touched on the MCard app a few times this morning, and it's something we introduced this year, and it's having some interesting little sort of spin-off benefits, and one of those is that working as we do now as a combined authority with our colleagues in the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, we've successfully bid for some money, and we will incorporate the ability for people to use the app to report problems and with antisocial behaviour or with unwanted attention or some of the things that people people do experience, so that they've got a way of actually reporting that back in, and feeling safer that they've got a reporting mechanism. So we're trying to tie transport things up with safety things up as much as we can. And I'm pleased to say what we have done is brought the Rail to Refuge scheme into the bus world again, using the MCard app, where the various support organisations that help people who are fleeing domestic violence can simply get a ticket onto somebody's phone, so that they can they've got a bus ticket to get to where they need to get to in a similar way to the rail scheme works. So we're trying to sort of join the dots a little bit on some of these issues, but we probably accept the fact that we are joining the dots between things that worked in different silos before. So it's early days.
Katie, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks for those responses. Just a couple of comments and one question. I think one thing that the Flexibus does do is ticks the boxes in terms of simplicity. And there's a thread, isn't there, through the whole plan about making ticketing more simple and bus services easier to use. And I think the app and the way it's ticketed does that. So I think that's really promising. It was good to hear that you've responded to the Joseph Rowntree report, because as both of you have said, the idea of taking people where they want to go, when they want to go, is a really key one in terms of getting people to use buses. And then just finally, you mentioned, Kim, that the Flexibus was expensive, and I can see that. Is there a point at which it can break even if it was full and busy and used all day? Is that a possibility?
Okay, Kim, Dave?
I think we're some way off that, to be honest. And we're also a little bit some way off understanding what capacity on such a service looks like, because obviously it is demand responsive. It does reflect it. If we can, one of the things we do need to do is for people to share journeys. We can't just offer a sort of free taxi service with a minibus. So we do need to find ways of actually getting it to link as many people as possible into one journey, and that way we start to obviously generate more patronage, generate more funding to offset the revenue cost. But I don't think anybody's made one of these services, and when your company have tried heroically in Liverpool and other places to do this, anybody's actually made them the sort of commercially viable is probably a long way off. I think what Councillor Groves is identifying is that they do run at a sort of fairly high overhead, and what we do need to do is get a level to use enough to bring that to a sort of sustainable subsidised level is probably the first stage to do that. But I think we shouldn't sort of identify the fact that at the end of the day you've got a low volume service, and we still got to pay the driver the same as you would pay the driver who's driving a double decker with 60 plus people on.
Okay. Kim.
The operators will probably put their hands in the head when I say this, but I think there's lots of conversations around DRT models and where we need to go with them. And like I said, we're not London, we're West Yorkshire, so they will really, you know, they could serve areas, but we need that patronage growth. I had a conversation, well, an email exchange, because really I want to work with the NHS transport. They could save a lot of money by working with us. And you know, those economies of scale are really important, but in terms of financing something between a transport authority and a health authority, especially when I've already got members from Wetherby who I know are really interested in this, and their nearest hospital, I think they moved from York to Harrogate. So there's got to be those conversations. I think, you know, that's the way that we could go forward. I think I've said to Dave, we can't fail on this. We can't be seen to fail. We've got to try and make this work. So we're going to do the very best we can to make sure that we try and get it to year 2 and beyond.
Okay, thank you. Neil, I hope you'll permit me to bring in a couple of members who've not yet contributed, and then I will bring you back in. So, Councillor Shazat.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if I heard Councillor Kim Groves earlier and mentioned this properly, that she said something about the fares and they're not high enough to make profit, and that's why the whole bus franchising system is broken, or the whole bus system is broken. So I was wondering, what would be the impact if we did actually start putting the fares up? Would the patronage increase or decrease, and how would we go going forward? Obviously, during the pandemic, we've got offers from bus services offering £1 at service and so on and so forth. But how sustainable is that? And the other question is for Gary, regards currently, I know the schemes are ongoing, but I think the Hedgerow scheme has finished. And what are the bus improvements or the timing improvements have we seen with these schemes? And again, in the report, it does say the highways network across West Yorkshire is patchy. There's no real coordination between yourselves. So if you've got those bus services running from one city to the other across West Yorkshire, why don't we have that level of coordination between the highway department? So just those 2 or 3 simple questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Kim, do you want to come in first?
Yes, I was talking about Transport for London and the financial difficulty that they're in. Pre-COVID, I think they had a deficit of something around 720 million and needed to invest capital into new rolling stock, because that's part of the deal with government. And they didn't make a fare increase at that time. So the report that's going forward is about the deficit they've got now, the challenges they've got now in terms of maintaining that network, and saying that they may have to reduce that network. In terms of fares, only my personal view, obviously where I worked in retail for 19 years, if you get the offer right, then I feel you will drive the footfall. I've really been interested in Bristol, where first did flat fares, and I think, did you have an increase of 13%, Paul, of patronage growth? So I think the fares debate is that we have to get the fare right. If we get the fare right, the people will come, and that is the same with rail. That is what I'm told by people, and we have got to get that model shift. As a country, we have to get people out of cars. It's not, you can't make every journey by bus, but significantly, if one person just didn't use the car one day a week, then we probably will get to our targets.
Thank you for that clarification. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions there around the service improvements for the Hedgerow. I haven't got any figures in my head, and just checking to see if others have, and I think we'll have to come back on that if that's okay, and we can feed that back through yourselves, Chair. There's quite an extensive monitoring system that's being developed around LitTip, as you would expect, given the size of the programme. And there are ongoing discussions with DFT about what that baseline should be, because when it was set up originally, or thought about originally back in sort of 16, 17, that was one position. And obviously then COVID came in when we were developing all these schemes, and patronage has been obviously massively impacted by that. So there is a discussion with DFT about what our baseline figures should be to actually show improvements. But let me take it away with colleagues and we'll come back to you with what we have.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Gary said, I think firstly, the head row works in some respects are partly to deal with the disruption that used to occur on the road because of the sort of conflicting demands of road space on there. So to a certain extent, it's slightly different when we're looking at bus lanes and bus priority corridors. That's when you very, very much focus on reducing journey times. Whereas in a city centre, it's as much trying to even out journey times so that there isn't that level of disruption that sometimes would have occurred in parts of the city centre because of the conflicts that occur between delivery vehicles, buses, cars, taxis, etc. So and the other thing that the city centre works are seeking to do is actually making it better for the bus passenger and the waiting environment as well. So and the walking environment. So it's part of a fairly wider sort of set of objectives. Whereas when we're looking at the specific corridors, that's when we very much focus on reducing journey times and measuring that. And again, we are in slightly unusual circumstances with traffic levels as well to be able to come to any firm views.
And the other comment was around liaison across West Yorkshire with highways authorities. Well, certainly at chief officer's level, there's a monthly meeting where we all get together and discuss strategic issues. At a more local level, network managers who oversee all the works on the highway, if they're impacting cross boundary, then I would hope that they are talking to each other, and I would expect that they are talking to each other. But again, that is something that I probably need to take away and just clarify. But I'll be disappointed if that liaison wasn't taking place. I think the issue will be more about, well, how do you actually remove some of the obstacles that are there, because it might require significant capital investment, which returns to a comment I made earlier.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. And just a quick one on those questions, especially to Kim, regards patronage going back up again, as Councillor Buckley mentioned earlier. How do we expect the patronage to go up? And we're looking at the increasing costs. And obviously you've mentioned fares, and I think probably ours are okay in West Yorkshire. How are we going to work to get back up to those figures of 2019, and then to get the 15% plus, as Councillor Buckley has said? Have we got a plan for that going forward? Thanks.
I think the biggest thing is building back confidence. So I know, and most people who use a bus in here know, that the buses are cleaned rigorously, and they've got a fogging system. It lasts for 30 days and then it's done again. Our operators go into their different systems, but the confidence needs to come back. We still obviously need to work on the data to recognise when services need to be adjusted, because the peaks are looking very different. I think the building back, we're still in a pandemic. So no one should be forced into any situation that they don't feel comfortable. But I think we're seeing in West Yorkshire that, you know, the growth has been on the patronage has been quicker than other places in the country because of the industries. And then those people who have used the bus have felt, you know, confident to travel on it again. And the leisure market has certainly built up, you know, in West Yorkshire. So it is confidence. We've got the BSIP plan. We're hoping to get a significant amount of funding. We can work with the operators through the enhanced partnership on shaping that fare offer for for people, but we've already started the work with young people. Long term, I would say, just had a discussion with Andrew this week about what about future generations and how do we get investment from government, and because we are reliant on a lot of small operators to take our future passengers to school, and they're not on the the cleanest buses you would want them to be on. They don't have the technology. So how can we expect them to make the transition if we can't put a great offer there for young people to travel to education? I think there's also the opportunity, I think our figures in terms of when we looked at them, it was mostly the concessions that hadn't returned. And that was interesting because I think during the height of the pandemic, we had quite a lot of the people who had concessionary passes travelling. So I think we've just got so much work to do. I can't sort of articulate how much work we have got to do in terms of building back better, but it will be being smarter. The leisure market is growing, so we need to capitalise on that. And we need to work with the rail industry and the integrated ticketing, make that simple. But we still need significant funding to put back the routes that have been taken away into those communities that are not served well. And there's many right across West Yorkshire, because the demand has dropped because of the use of private car. Never has there been a better opportunity if we want to meet our net zero target than to try and encourage that model shift. And it's a fantastic opportunity for government to send 300 million to West Yorkshire to do that, to help us do that.
Thank you. No one else wants to contribute on that one from the top table. I'll bring in Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm new to being a councillor as well as being new to this scrutiny. So hopefully this question will be really simple. So Dave, right quite near the start in your presentation, one of your slides on aims was said making paying for bus travel more affordable. Does that actually mean making fares cheaper? And if so, how are we going to measure whether we've made fares cheaper?
I think there's two aspects of the fares element. One is making it more simple, but actually, I think was mentioned earlier, reflective of people's sort of lives and their journey patterns as well. So I think in terms of one of the frequent criticisms of buses and the bus service gets is that, particularly from people who don't use it very often, is how do I find out how much it's going to cost? And we need to make it so that people have a clear understanding of how much a bus fare costs. Affordability is an interesting question because obviously it's relative. One of the things that even the government strategy is seeking to bring fares down, and it's been quite clear that we've got to find ways of increasing demand and increasing volume, as it were, at a cheaper price. I think that's a challenge that we've all been set in terms of how to do that. One of the things we've been talking about, and the bus service improvement plan identifies, is that one of the ways of doing this is to establish a maximum price anybody will pay for however many bus journeys they make in West Yorkshire in the day, and then look at how fares sit underneath that, so that people are actually buying the journeys that they actually want to make, whereas people are paying a bus fare they don't know until they've asked the driver and not quite sure whether they're actually being offered the right product or not, and that sort of thing. So to a certain extent, we've got to simplify the product, we've got to make it more understandable for people to do, and we've got to look at the baseline price again and trying to keep that sort of in a place that makes it equivalent to the other aspects of cost of living as well. So I think we all have been set this challenge as to how to make fares more understandable and for people to feel they're more affordable.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. I knew it wouldn't be that simple, but it's just going to back to the point that Kim made, I think, about how some of our residents who are poorer are paying really expensive fares. So how will we know whether we've achieved this better affordability, or how, you know, however we're describing it? I get the nuances, I get the limitations, the drastic limitations caused by, you know, like funding issues, but how will we know whether we've made it more affordable, cheaper for people generally within West Yorkshire, or more particularly within Leeds?
I guess one, obviously, the numbers of people travelling and where they're travelling to and from is one indicator that we would want to use, and obviously if we can increase the number of people travelling, then must be doing something right in that space. I think we also do need to do a lot more work in terms of tracking the cost of bus fares against other aspects of cost of living, to make sure that, you know, one of the criticisms that we've all been given by government, even in the national bus strategy, is the graph that shows how bus fares have gone way ahead of inflation. And I think one of the thinking that we all need to have now is that it's no longer a case that you just try and get the best amount of money you can from a limited number of people. I think the philosophy's got to change. We need more people to travel, and in doing so, we've got to make the price attractive for them to do that. So I think it is changing that sort of philosophy. But your question really is about how do we measure that, and I think as we've put out in the bus service improvement plan, we need much more sophisticated ways of measuring things. I think public transport industry in the past has simply counted people and counted the money. We need to actually get far more into the detail there to be able to answer those sort of questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to make a link between the cost of fares and the reason for bus priority. So boiling it down to a really simplistic basis, the quicker we can make bus journeys, the more attractive they are if we can compare even better car journey time. But also if we can reduce the number of buses in a cycle, or even better, maintain the same buses in a cycle with more passengers on, then again, that makes fares affordable. So congestion does have a direct link on the cost of providing buses. And I can think of a couple of examples close to my home. I don't live in West Yorkshire personally, where my bus route, the bus operator has added 4 buses into the cycle to maintain the same timetable with, at the time, the same fares. So again, when bus operators are having to manage that increased level of cost for bus timetables, for bus services to be so, again, I'm sure there's dozens of many West Yorkshire examples. So the work we're doing with Gary, the work that we're doing with local authorities to speed up buses is absolutely crucial, and there is a very, very direct link between making buses faster, more tractable, prioritised, and keeping fares down.
Thank you. Sorry, Kim, were you?
I think it's going to be, realistically, probably a couple of years before we get the true measure of success. And I say that because we've just gone through WIPTIP, which was 173 million, Gary. That's already proving to me just exactly what Andrew said. So the electric park and ride at Sturton, feedback we've had from customers, and that base will totally grow, will be 100% successful. They used to have a 30-40 minute journey into Leeds. It now takes 15 minutes. It's just completely transformed. And I've used that on several occasions. I think in terms of the work that we're just going into in the enhanced partnership is really crucial for West Yorkshire. It's got to be, you know, to make this partnership work, we have really got to deliver on fares. And why I mentioned Bristol, the flat fares, the £2, it might not be the right thing for West Yorkshire, but I think that will drive the patronage. We've already tested the water because we launched the young people's ticket 2 years ago, and I think it was 260, 280, and we instantly got an 81% return on that. We've launched this 60p ticket, got 91% of young people using public transport. But the pain is going to be that we've never had as many, funding wise, as much funding going out in West Yorkshire on infrastructure because of transforming cities, and that causes problems, it causes congestion. And even more so, if we get a tram, we're going to have roads, you know, there'll be routes that will have to be dug up. So it's going to take time to get to that. And I think we really need to be clear. And the public, I think we'll see the benefits of Whip Tip. Whip Tip has been acknowledged across the country as being a major success in terms of delivery. And will make a difference to people's journeys. I think it's a lot of different components that really we need to look at. So I'll give you one example that we have got to really try and resolve. Had some work done when I first came into this role of a young person's journey from their postcode, from their door, from Bradford to Leeds City College. And the journey is still an hour and 10 journey there and back. So we have got to make sure that all the districts, and we have these conversations with leaders and portfolio holders, actually deliver bus priority corridors, as Andrew has said. There's got to be a segregation on routes. If I, you know, as a lead on transport, if I could do it on most routes, I would put it in straight away, because the young people who did the video for us through our head partnership, the winning video for them, the school that actually won the competition, and their video, their vision was of buses just going past traffic jams. Now, we're never going to be able not to make every journey, like I said, but actually when people are stuck in congestion and they see the bus going past, then the more people we get on, the more we can do. And whether we're in a franchising world or not, you have to grow the patronage to make any model work. So there's a lot to do.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Thank you for that perspective. I mean, you made the point earlier about the experience in our own ward, which I'm sure is replicated across other disadvantaged communities with low car ownership. But it's not just the price, but it's also the connectivity. Does it take people from where they are to where they want to be? And the best example really are the number of people who will share a private hire vehicle. I'm not making an advert for private hire vehicles, Mohammed, to go to Morrison's in Hunslet, and it's cheaper to make that return journey than it is to use the bus. And that's absolutely crucial in terms of addressing an issue which is about levelling up and is about inclusive growth. But just moving on, do you want to come back on anything other, Lisa? Right, Neil, I'll bring you back in.
Thank you, Chair. And it was just going back to the LP tip and specifically the park and rides. And I wanted to ask about a few years ago, we were told we were going to have a park and ride at the far side of Old Woodley. And there's a public consultation and all that happened. This must be 3 or 4 years ago now. I can't remember. And I know this was put into the future. Now, in addition to that, there were also going to be changes in Councillor Shazad's ward in Moortown, which actually affects people from Old Woodley, probably more than Moortown residents, on King Lane and Stonegate Road, which is acknowledged to be a major blockage in getting not just buses, but any kind of traffic into the city. And I wanted to ask where we are with that, because on page whatever it is, I think it's 25, or it might be another 25, yeah. There are some schemes and it refers to the final scheme, and this scheme isn't on that list. So I just wondered, has that gone forever, or when might we be able to expect it, please?
Okay, we're still, Old Woodley Park and Ride, we're still keen to pursue that, and we're hoping to resolve some land issues and move that one into the planning arena in the near future. There is still then the question of actually funding the implementation of that, but we want to move that scheme as far along the line as possible. So that's the latest position with that one. Because I think it's really important that we have a facility to the north of the city. Obviously, we're well served in the other areas at the moment. I think it's important that we explore that possibility and try to secure funding for that. King Lane, I mentioned in my sort of brief comments right at the beginning of this meeting that there were a couple of schemes that we were trying to find a way of progressing, bringing into the programme starting early next year. And the one you mentioned is one of those. So because of the, I would say, very careful management of the programme, we look like we may be in a position to actually move those on. But we're just double checking and starting conversations with local ward members about details of those sorts of proposals to make sure there still remains local support, so that we're then able to make a decision whether to bring those back into the programme. So watch this space, there may be some positive news.
Okay, we'll come back now.
Just very briefly, Chair. So just to confirm then, Gary, the development of the Leeds Jewish housing scheme, which has come closer to King Lane, that will have no detrimental effect on the bus lane and so on.
Again, that I'm not aware personally, but I can take that away and double check that rather than say anything that may be inaccurate now. So.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw, Nicole.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. Kim, you mentioned that Manchester are on year 5 of their model. Have you had any feedback as to what's working and what's not?
And I know it's been extremely expensive. I believe that there's still a legal challenge to come back on Manchester. So to actually build a case for franchising, you've got to have a really robust evidence case that is audited. So we've been following Manchester closely. We don't get lots of information from Manchester, but we've also been working with Liverpool on what's working for them. So yeah, I think they did launch a free travel for young people. And then I did see some media coverage, which you never know if media, if it's true, and that they may have to look for funding to continue that offer. But I think the operators will be more probably cited on what's the developments in Manchester. But I do believe there's still the possibility of there being a legal challenge because the business case. Two of the operators have looked at the business case.
Andrew, I will bring you in, but could I just clarify? Because one of the big selling points when the government was keen to force areas like West Yorkshire down the road of having an elected mayor was that they would have the powers to introduce franchising, whereas if you didn't have an elected mayor, you had to jump through a whole series of hoops. Is it still conditional then? It's not a power that allows the mayor to proceed come what may. There are still hoops to be jumped through. So Andrew, I'll bring you in because you indicated, but I think maybe Dave or Kim will want to come back on that.
Yeah, the power to make a franchise scheme is a mayoral power. So whereas under previous arrangements, it had to be something that was agreed by the Secretary of State, and the earlier versions of the Bus Services Act and their application to non-mayoral authorities is that that's still the case, whereas it is the mayor's decision ultimately. But I think as Councillor Groves has said, and we see in Manchester, that even then, it still could be subject to judicial review. there is a lot of process to go through before the mayor can make that decision, which I think we set out in our fairly complicated little diagram that we shared. And there does have to be an independent audit of the business case for franchising before the mayor can make that decision. So yes, it is a mayor's decision, but the mayor has got to make that decision with the audit having been done, a public consultation having been done, and has to do that in a way that that doesn't give rise to subsequent judicial review.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Dave. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I was just also going to bring in some previous experience where I'd previously worked for Nexus, the equivalent to Waker in Tyne and Wear. And under previous legislation, Nexus at the time I was there was part of this, tried to bring in a quality contract regime similar to a franchise system. And again, it has very similar echoes. There was 5 years of work on that. There was 5 years of missed relationships, 5 years of progression that was lost. At the time, the traffic commissioner made the decision that was thrown out at the time by the relevant traffic commissioner. And thankfully, I'm pleased to say now I'm personally involved in that work in the North East to bring us, actually, I would say up to the level of West Yorkshire. And I've made the point in this committee before when I initially came into the role covering West Yorkshire as a stranger, I would say that the partnership approach, albeit informal at the time, was staggeringly different to what I'd seen elsewhere. It's not for me or my colleagues to say if the franchise system is better or not. That's down to the men, the combined authority. I would say that we need to focus on outcomes. What do we collectively, I say we, including the mayor in this, what do we want to see out of the bus network? How do we get there? What funding can we access from government to get there? So to summarize, I'll just say from that previous experience, if we focus on the outcomes, I'm fairly confident we can reach the majority, if not most, if not all of them, quickly in partnership and working with the enhanced partnership.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's fair to say that the bar for quality contracts was set so high, it gave huge opportunities for challenge at almost every juncture, which I don't think exists in the new system, but obviously, you know, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating on that one. Nicole, did you want to come back? Okay. Well, I've not seen anyone else signifying, so members have asked most of the questions that I got jotted down, but there's just something I wanted to clarify, and it's based on points that Kim has made and Paul's made about funding. Clearly, this is a very exciting plan and a wonderful perspective as to what we might see and develop in future. But it is absolutely predicated on finance. And Paul has said in the short term, finance is a bit uncertain. And obviously in the longer term, the front loading of much of what's contained in the BSIP is based on the bid to government. And going back to Kim's comment, she's not holding her breath in terms of whether we get the full sum or just part of it. And I suppose my question is, what is plan B if we don't get the full bid or anything like it? I mean, presumably we have to go back to the drawing board and prioritize some elements of the plan. Presumably the quick wins can be achieved, but then beyond that, presumably you've got to, you know, relook at the whole thing and prioritize elements of it.
Always have a plan B, always in this job. So I think in terms of, we do need the basic funding, you're absolutely right. We've got to work out what we've got of the 317 Transforming Cities Fund that will roll into CRSTS, because the government were quite good at putting the back end of TCF into CRSTS, which we did get 830 million, which You know, it's a significant amount, but it's about working out those figures. The leaders have also got gain share. So like I said, there's a lot of big decisions to be made. I think in terms of the partnership, because we have had support from the operators in terms of the Zebra bid that's gone forward for new electric buses, we're confident, you know, hopefully we'll get far in that process. If not, we just have to keep going for bids. We can't take our foot off the pedal, and we have to work collectively. But just what we've done in the last year with the elliptic funding as well, it's been really useful. We've launched the network navigation, a tube style map for Leeds, and we have launched DRT. We are rolling out network navigation right across West Yorkshire. We've had the young people's ticket. We've done work with the Department of Work and Pensions, with the gifting. There's so much work going on at WICA, the infrastructure plans. We've never had a pipeline of bus priority corridors for the whole of West Yorkshire. So we need to deliver those. I think we've been shortchanged with the IRP last week in terms of the rail settlement that we got. Absolutely. So we don't have a tram system. We've been knocked back by government on so many occasions on the tram system. We're working on a mass transit system, but it will take 5 years to deliver. People cannot wait 5 years for a decent public transport system, and the bus is the solution for us to bridge that gap. If they want to actually level up, if they want to rebuild the economy, if they want to build back better, then we just need to keep collectively. And I do really feel supported at West Yorkshire because the leaders of all parties have supported all the bids that we've put forward. We collectively have to continue to make the argument for bus funding, regardless of who is running it. The customer just wants a decent service, and that's not a lot to ask. So we have a plan B, and we will do what we can.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Just on the sort of technical detail, if you like, on the funding. As always in local government in particular, we've got to separate capital and revenue. On the capital side, some of the funding for doing things in there, and particularly in infrastructure schemes, sits within the city region sustainable transport settlement, 800 or so million that Councillor Groves just mentioned. So there's money in that element, and government have said that's where in mayoral combined authorities who do get that CRSTS, that's where that funding will come. The real challenge is on the revenue funding element, as always is, because at the end of the day, a bus service is something which, yes, you can invest in infrastructure for bus services, you can invest in buses, but the operation is a revenue cost. And I think we're all realistic to know that the value that we put in the bus service improvement plan will fall short of what we can expect to get from government, but we do expect to get some funding, and we do expect to as you said, Chair, to address the quick wins and to do what we can as a sort of first stage of doing it. What we do have with the bus service improvement plan, though, I think, is for the first time in my recollection, we've actually put a number against our ambition. We've got, this is what it's going to cost to deliver the sort of service we want. And some of that's funded by government, some of that's funded by local government, some of that's funded by the turnover of the bus service in terms of its fares and revenues and offsetting costs. So, and we're probably in a far better place than I can recall in terms of at least understanding what we can do and knowing how to deploy money that we do get. So there is a plan B, C and D.
Okay, thanks very much. And then 3 more quick questions from me, and then I'll bring this discussion to a close. The first is reference has been made to integrating bus services and rail services, but we've discussed in the past the potential for buses to connect local communities around the rail network to bring people in rather than them having to get in their cars to drive to the nearest station. I mean, what is the potential for that? That's my first question. The second is there's reference to a superbus initiative, and I perhaps overlooked it, but I couldn't see what that actually meant. And my third point is about the fact that there's a zero carbon target up for 2036, but significant progress in inverted commas by 2030. And I suppose my question is, what will constitute significant progress?
I'll next start. The bus and rail integration. I mean, we've got a fairly good example in this region of something we want to do more of, because we've always sort of linked Otley with Menston rail station, and use that as a way of enabling people to travel the 2 miles or so from Otley to connect the rail station. We need to do more of that. It's not without its challenges, integrating buses and trains, in the sense that you've got to do it right. You've got to you've got a timetable that's fixed by the rail network, which imposes certain constraints on how you can run your bus to it. But we can do more of that sort of Menston station type of initiative, I think, in that, and I think that there's more to go on in terms of how we could do a better integration, not just between bus and rail, but one of the things that's in the plan is this concept of mobility hubs. Hebden Bridge is a good example of another place where we run buses to trains, but we also have other things, and we want to develop Hebden Bridge as further as the sort of place where people can walk, cycle, catch the bus, and link to the rail network. So there are lots of things to address that we're not doing at the moment.
Okay. And the zero carbon?
Sorry, Superbus, yes, and zero carbon.
And Superbus.
Yeah. Superbus, right? Superbus is an odd thing, because that's a sort of Department for Transport sort of concept that it was running with just before the pandemic, and it ran a bit of a competition for local authorities and bus operators to bid to, and that sort of didn't go any further because of the pandemic. They've reinvented or reintroduced it, and essentially what we've done with colleagues around the table is to say, well, actually, if we were to particularly focus on towns and sort of localities rather than cities, if we were to focus on improving the bus network in those areas on a sort of jointly funded risk and reward sort of basis. So we've got some ideas as how to do that, and they may be some of the early things we do, and particularly around some of the sort of secondary towns in our region that where we can work closely to support the local economy and the local retail offer in those areas as well. So we're working on that. I think that the zero carbon piece, well, I think it was mentioned, Councillor Groves mentioned the Zebra bid, where we're at the next stage of a process to fund 120 or so electric buses. That takes us to about 10 to 15% of the fleet in the region. So there's still some way to go in setting a 2036 time scale, as government has done in other ways, and as local government's done in other ways, and as industry has done in other ways. It sort of sets a process whereby subsequent investment in new vehicles will sort of get us there with the sort of turnover of investment being in new modes of fueling the vehicles. I think it's fair to say that the current model that the government have is to say, well, if a bus company is investing in a bus anyway, then it'll top the cost of that bus up to the cost of an electric bus or hydrogen bus. The Zebra bid takes that step further a little bit, because it actually funds some of the infrastructure needed, charging and that sort of thing. But I think we all recognise the fact that it's still a little bit on the margins of a big investment, both in charging or in hydrogen infrastructure, that's needed to uplift all of the buses in any region to zero carbon. So there's still a long way to go. So this plan doesn't set out exactly the sort of process. It sets an aspirational target and identifies the process we need to get to reach it.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave. Well, thank you everyone at the top table, bottom table, however we want to perceive it, for your attendance. I think, as always, we've had a very useful, productive and informative session in terms of updating our bus inquiry report, and thank you, and then enjoy your onward journey to wherever it is, however it is. So thank you very much, everybody. Right, takes on to the next agenda item, which is usually for information. I don't think there's anything more to report on that. And the date of the next meeting is contained on the agenda paper. So thanks very much, everyone, for your attendance and your input.